Motivation doesn't come first. Generally, it comes afterwards as we start to get into that feedback loop of a felt experience. So as we start to feel better, it creates that momentum. So I would even sometimes take motivation out of it because it's kind of a sticky word. Because if I wait to be motivated, I may never go.
Welcome to the Advanced Women's Health Podcast, where we empower women with the latest insights and advice on holistic health. From cutting-edge medical research to practical wellness tips, our mission is to help you thrive at every stage of life. Join us as we explore topics ranging from hormonal balance and reproductive health to nutrition and mental well-being. Whether you're seeking solutions for a specific health concern or simply want to enhance your overall wellness, you're in the right place. Let's embark on this journey to better health together. This is the Advanced Women's Health Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Advanced Women's Health Podcast. My name is Andrea Whelan. I'm a naturopathic doctor in Victoria, BC, and I am here today with my dear friend, Lisa Lopez. She is an RMT, a registered massage therapist, and so much more. So I will let you, Lisa, kind of introduce yourself and what you do.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Andrea. And I'm really happy to be here. Yeah, I've been an RMT now for over 8 years. And as my practice has developed over the years, I found myself opening up to more craniosacral work. I'm a biodynamic craniosacral therapist as well.
I mean, why I wanted to bring you on this podcast or do this together was, I have been sending you a lot of my patients lately because I think it's so great to be able to work together, but have someone who does a lot of kind of physical touch and who's tuning into the nervous system and kind of assessing what's going on from that standpoint. And I know you have such beautiful conversations with your clients as well. And so that's why I wanted to bring you on today, because I know in speaking to you many times over the years, it's such a fascination of the nervous system. And today, the topic that we are wanting to talk about is the kind of moving through resistance, because ultimately that's where a lot of what I've heard from you is kind of where your clients are stuck and where a lot of my patients are stuck, and having more tools to help people navigate that, and not just tools on how to navigate, but even understanding, why they're stuck, and also knowing that they're not alone in that, and actually how common that is, I think, is so important. So kind of wanting to normalize a lot of these pieces, but yeah, kind of wanting also to discuss tools and how to lower that resistance. But I thought we would start with kind of some basic physiology, because I think knowledge is power. So yeah, I'll kind of touch on just the nervous system, and especially the sympathetic nervous system, and then I'll hand it over to you to talk about the parasympathetic system, because I know you work on that part of the nervous system very much in your practice. So the nervous system, I think what's important to know is then to the autonomic nervous system, which is part of the nervous system that is beyond conscious control. And so this is kind of happening in the background. It's keeping us functioning, our body's functioning. There's two major aspects of the autonomic nervous system. And so there's the sympathetic, or the two major parts, shall I say, sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And you've probably heard the sympathetic nervous system, or fight or flight, otherwise known as fight, flight, or freeze response. And essentially, this part of the nervous system was designed for our safety, designed for our survival. So it's a very good thing that it's there. However, it can cause problems in the long run as well. But most importantly, it keeps us alive. And so when we look at the parasympathetic and sympathetic, it's not like we can live without one of them. Both of them have to be kind of functioning, but it is all about a balance of the two. So to dive a little bit more into the sympathetic nervous system, as I said, designed for survival. So whether that's fighting an enemy, running from an avalanche, or freezing, to hide from a predator of sorts, all things really important. The problem is our brain can kind of get stuck in that sympathetic state, and sometimes can even make mistakes, as if, even though we're in a safe environment, can still respond as if we're in danger. And I think that's very common in today's world. There's a lot of stress, as we know, right? Economically, financially, emotionally, all those things. But what I'll speak to kind of later in this talk is also physiological kind of imbalances that play into that kind of danger signal as well, and looking at all the things we can do about that. What I forgot to talk about too is actually in a sympathetic state is, our body is really trying to get us prepared to, again, fight, flight, or freeze. And that means sending blood flow to your major muscle groups, diverting blood flow from the gut, ensuring that your body can, again, that you have the strength and the capacity to do what you need to do to survive in that moment. So all good things in the short term, not really good in the long term. So Lisa, I will let you talk to the parasympathetic nervous system, because I know, again, that's your bread and butter.
Well, I really want to, also acknowledge how important that piece is, the physiological piece, because I think, I have a lot of clients that come in and they don't have that knowledge piece that, maybe it's something physiologically that I need to support. I feel like that part's not talked about enough. The nutrient piece, the resourcing, working with someone to help make sure your vitamins, nutrients, those things are all in balance. So you can start to work on these other pieces and working with a team. So often I have clients come in and they've been through a traumatic event or burnout or stress, and they're looking for support to start to help downregulate their system or just have a new experience. That's kind of where I'll focus, is that often when clients come in, they're pretty high functioning and they're just wanting, to relax or kind of start to dip their toes into that parasympathetic state where we begin to heal. If we're in a fight, flight, or freeze state, all our resources are being pulled out to run from a bear, to run from an external or a potential threat. So we're not actually in this state to heal, to quiet our mind, to be creative, problem solve. We just don't have those resources. And by design, you don't want to be thinking about what to make for dinner when you're running from a bear.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I have clients come in, and a big part of my work is craniosacral therapy, where we start to remind the body of its healing state. So essentially, what I hope to offer them is a new experience in their nervous system. So what that means is where we start to build a felt sense and start to build that interoception so that we can begin to understand the language of our own body, how we're holding tension, how we're holding our breath. That's a big piece. And to bring those unconscious patterns to the conscious space, because it's very difficult to start to do the work or to understand ourselves if we're operating in an unconscious space. So a large part of my work is shedding light on those unconscious holding patterns, primarily in the body, primarily in the breath. And what tends to unfold from that space tends to be a bit more, can go into more of a spiritual space as well, because we have to understand what are we in conflict with that is stopping us from accessing that space. So it becomes a bigger conversation that we start to dip our toes into gently, slowly in a space of safety for ourselves, our body, our mind. So we move very slowly into these spaces, because sometimes if we're in a high functioning stress state and we dip too deeply into the parasympathetic, there is some kickback from our system, because it's it doesn't know how to engage in that space and feel safe yet, essentially.
That can be overwhelming too, right? And that's,
yeah.
I mean, I think I can speak from personal experience, but a lot of what my patients will talk about too. And that's, I'm just so grateful for your work and would love to work more and more together. I almost think patients should see you first, even before coming to see me or a colleague, because and they don't even know where they're at because they haven't had the time to sit with themselves, to reflect. And sometimes it's not about time. Sometimes it's too scary to sit, right? And to be still, because that's when, maybe some things that haven't been looked at and have kind of been tucked under the rug for a long time is there lurking. And if you don't have the tools and resources, and if it's not in a safe space, as you say, it can be overwhelming for the system, and you can kind of have more of a negative response with that, which only is a vicious cycle to not wanting to kind of work on these things or explore that aspect.
Absolutely. So I finished school out in Toronto as an RMT, and I was working at a place downtown Toronto, and I witnessed something fairly traumatic. And I started having nightmares for weeks after this event. So I started going to therapy and talking it out to help, regulate my nervous system again and understand and integrate this experience. Where that experience got activated again in my body from a trigger. And because I just happened to be in the right place at the right time with a group of people that knew how to guide me through this sort of reactivation, that I was able to see that experience from an omniscient perspective in a safe container. And I was able to integrate that experience. So now when I talk about it, there's no activation in my system. And this is where I think this work and working with the nervous system can be so powerful, is that I think, especially for myself, there's so many stories in my body from growing up, from childhood, from, partners, experiences out in life that reside in the body. And as we go out in the world, those things can get activated without our understanding of where the root is. So as we begin to dialogue with the body, understand our responses, understand our own activations, we're able to interface with them in a more balanced way so that we know what is ours and we know what's not. And that's, I think, been one of the most powerful pieces of working with the nervous system in this way, is that you get to show up as you want to the best of your ability in each environment and room that you enter. Now, it's not perfect and it doesn't work every time, but there's a little bit more space to breathe, to respond. So we're not always in this sort of reactive space. We're creating a little bit more insulation and understanding. So there's this sort of deeper understanding of ourselves and the environment and how it affects us.
I think you did. Yeah, that was a really good overview, and kind of talking about, the pieces that are all part of maybe why someone can be resistant, and kind of the mental, emotional, and maybe spiritual things. And sometimes, again, this is, I would say a lot of times it's not something you're even aware of. It's in your subconscious, and it is from more past trauma. Trauma can be a big word. We talk about big T trauma, little t trauma, but let's say just past experiences, even when you're a child, just things that haven't been processed. And so there's belief system that comes from that, or, witnessing something significant like you did, Lisa. And it kind of speaks to, what I mentioned before with that autonomic nervous system kind of happening in the background. So, again, you could be getting these messages of danger. And that can be from, again, these more maybe negative, difficult experiences from the past that you're kind of stuck in that freeze cycle, and it's all past things, but just hasn't, I guess I like the word exfoliated. If you haven't exfoliated some of these experiences, then that imprint is still left with you. And again, it's not even something you're aware of until you're triggered and until you're in that peak moment. And or especially if these triggers are the same, eventually it takes time to look at, okay, interesting. It's always these kind of moments where I become triggered, but you have to have time to consider and to reflect. It's like, I wonder where this is from, right? And then to start to explore that piece.
I just want to mention there is so much more research coming out now, and a wonderful array of books about how a lot of those experiences are stored in the body. And, you know, until we're aware where it is stored, it's very hard to integrate until we, you know, cast our loving awareness onto it and have a bit of a conversation with the impact in our body.
And, you know, our body also needs to be in somewhat of, you know, a safe space, as you say, but also a safe physiological state, I think, in order to take those next steps, right? Otherwise, it's just all going to be quite triggerable. So what I wanted to speak about was, you know, what I see in my practice and what we know is, again, it's not just about these mental, emotional stressors. There's a lot of physiological stressors that, you know, can take up a lot of, well, I could say just cause stress on our physiology and contribute to the fight or flight response, which is, you know, the production. I mean, I didn't mention that before, but the fight flight response involves cortisol and adrenaline. And those hormones, you know, can cause some downfall from those hormones over time and can wreak havoc on our mental health in a big way. And our reproductive hormones as well. I mean, I could go on and on about that, but the point is, the big pieces I see is, you know, actually blood sugars is a huge one, because ultimately low blood sugars or high blood sugars is kind of a life or death scenario in our body. And, you know, for patients with diabetes, that's a real thing. They could actually die from having too low or too high of a blood sugar. For everyone else who's not diabetic, it's still a problem, but the mechanisms to keep the blood sugar from going too high or going too low are in place. And again, in the short term, those mechanisms are amazing because, you know, again, designed for survival, keep us alive. In the long term, that's where it can create more problems. So having, you know, working on blood sugar balance has been actually a total game changer in my practice. And from so many different aspects, like patients have said, not only are their energy is more stable, they're focusing better, anxiety is better. You know, there's even a component of blood sugar and insulin issues in depression. So by that standpoint, it helps. Sleep is better, right? If we're sleeping better, generally we're feeling better and we're going to have more capacity, more energy to, you know, again, to maybe dive into these deeper parts. But to go back to the blood sugar piece, essentially it's having, you know, a good balance of protein, fats, fibers in our diet, eating regularly. And, you know, those are more the basic. You can get a bit more fine-tuned about that. But generally, especially if someone's, you know, eating a lot of carbohydrates, and we can see kind of blood sugars spiking and crashing and spiking and crashing. I have a beautiful infographic I always show my patients, and often they could recognize themselves in that graphic. But the big piece is when blood sugars crash, that's a stress response. And so the body releases cortisol, adrenaline to bring the blood sugar back up. So why not we remove those physiological stressors? Because my goodness, there's enough stress in the world, external stressors, right? So by reducing those physiological stressors, again, we allow more capacity for the other types of stressors that are happening day to day and outside our control. So that's a big one, the blood sugars. The other things that come up a lot are nutrient deficiencies, you know, gut issues. They're gut able to break down foods and absorb nutrients optimally. Sleep, obviously, sleep's a big one for feeling resilient. There's also infections. I mean, we're seeing a lot of chronic infections, you know, post-COVID, you know, whether it's vaccine or even the infection itself, it causes so much inflammation in the body. And some patients, or a number of patients, have chronic issues from that. And when you're chronically inflamed, it can be really hard to feel resilient in that context. And especially when there's chronic pain, right? So you're getting that signal constantly. And so that's where kind of working through these pieces, and not that you can do everything at once, but understanding these pieces and working through these layers, again, is helping to build more and more of that capacity.
I love how you approach that, because it's really looking at it from like a really dynamic standpoint and as a whole, like, you know, and even when we start to engage and invite in more experience with the parasympathetic nervous system, is like, do I have the resource and the space right now to tend to what might come up, right? Or do I need to work more with like the physiological piece and make sure my blood sugar, my sleep, do I have these sort of pillars tended to so that I have resource to go into some physiological patterning? Essentially, I'm thinking of a client that, very high stress job, came in for a cranial session and it actually brought up too much. And what we realized was that it really wasn't the time for them to start like stepping into that space yet, until they had more space in their life and their sleep, their nutrition, a few other things were more in balance, until they had more resource and space to tend to some of the more emotional pieces, the more, the trauma pieces that might come up out of seeing those unconscious.
Absolutely. And, as you were saying that, it reminded me that I didn't even mention hormone balance. And I see a lot of women in perimenopause and menopause. I'm sure you do as well, Lisa. Especially perimenopause can be such a tumultuous time. And so that can be a really difficult place to explore maybe things under the surface when the hormones just aren't there. It says, generally these women are feeling very overwhelmed, very stressed out. And, whatever the plan needs to be is just very simple, one step at a time. And part of that balancing those hormones so that they can, just have some consistency and have, actually the brain clarity, shall I say, because if you have a lot of brain fog and you just really don't feel well, it's hard to go to those next steps.
Today's episode is brought to you by none other than Advanced Women's Health. If you are interested in diving in deeper to your health, if you are finally ready to feel like yourself, and you are finally over hearing everything's normal, everything's fine, and you want a deeper dive into your healthcare, then we are here to help you. We are currently helping patients in British Columbia and Ontario, Canada. But don't worry, if you're in another province, still reach out, get added to the wait list as we expand coast to coast. We cannot wait to work with you. Check out the show notes for more information on how to get started.
So a few concepts. What makes one person resilient and one not? And I think all humans are resilient. I think that can be more of a subjective thing, right? If a patient feels not resilient, what are the pieces to that? And again, we already talked about the physiological components that may be there. Again, some of the mental, emotional blocks, maybe childhood trauma or previous trauma. But overall, I think there's a bit of a mindset to that as well. And, when I think about it, when we're struggling, you can kind of go two different ways. You can say, I'm struggling. It's my fault. And what's wrong with me? And kind of spiral into shame around that and go into that freeze response. And, when you're in that camp, it's really impossible to get out of that. It's not impossible to get out of that, but it's harder to heal. It's harder to move through that. And if you're having those experiences over and over, not only is that depressing, but you get to a place where it's all resistance and you don't want to do anything, right? So there's that camp. And then on the other side, I'm struggling. What resources do I have? Who can I turn to? That's a much more kind of hopeful place to be and much more actionable place to be. And, I think more of a chance that you can move through that resistance instead of letting that resistance kind of take over you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think a big piece of that is, the environment you grew up in, your exposure, your belief systems. I think, we forget how much we are influenced by our environment, our relationships, even the way we hold our body. If someone isn't aware that they're slouching and maybe their posture isn't great, then they're not aware that they're not getting as much oxygen as they could into their lungs. So sometimes it's just slowly shifting a perspective to see something differently, and it doesn't need to happen overnight. It's like little tiny steps of like a new awareness, like, oh, I guess my jaw is a little bit tight, and then slowly bringing that into your awareness and softening it a few times a day. And we start to bring in a new input. We start to rewire our body slowly over time. That's a big piece of like the transition to like building that resistance, is like, what feels accessible to me right now? oh, I can go see my naturopath. I can go see my counselor, my therapist, my RMT. This feels accessible to me now. And then maybe when I have a bit more like resource, I can take on something bigger, and you start to build that capacity and that trust in yourself, so as these little moments throughout your day, through showing up for yourself, going to appointments, getting more information about what's going on, that trust starts to build and that resilience starts to build. And, it's like learning a new language. It just takes time.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it takes time and mindfulness. And I think, we've talked about this a lot over tea and kind of laughed about it too, but just a bit of a personal story for me. I mean, I'm a mother of 2 young children. My husband right now is in full-time school. So, life is busy to say the least. And I have a busy practice. It's all good, but it's also, you wake up and it's just go. And that is something, as I've reflected over the years, and this is more in the last 6 months even, is creating that space. Like it took some time to get to that point to realize, wow, that is what I am missing, is just that quiet time so that I can have some reflection time, so that my nervous system can calm down. And, for me, it was yoga. And it was a friend of mine that introduced, I've heard of yoga, obviously, but helping me move through that resistance was a friend telling me about specific classes, actually one being sound medicine, which was just a beautiful way to unwind. But it was like having a buddy to go with, that took away some of that obstacle, because I was familiar with her and I trusted that, I trusted her opinion of where to go. And so that was really helpful. And it wasn't until I was there and actually in the class, because sometimes you just have to go through the motions as well. And I was in a class, and that's when I started to realize how much that was missing in my life and how just wonderful it was, first of all. And it was just such a key piece. But for me, I had to, remove myself from the home, because having a busy home life with children is almost impossible to have these moments of, reflection, as you talk about, Lisa, which sounds so lovely, but it's just hard when there's kids around. And of course, a house that needs tending to, and charting and work that, that needs tending to. So I've been talking to my patients a lot about that. There's something beautiful about leaving the home. For some of us, we can't do that in our home. We can't fully unwind in our home in that way anyways. And so having a place that you build trust, that maybe has the smells, the looks, the community that allows you to just, relax and unwind and have that moment for yourself. So it just looks different with kids.
Yeah. Well, it's so important too. It's like leaning into the community and like being around other people, like walking that path and, having that accountability to keep showing up.
Mm-hmm. I think we were talking recently too about, motivation, because that's the thing, is people know a lot of times, what they should be doing. There's a lot of shoulds, obviously, and shoulds aren't motivating in themselves by any means. Sometimes can just, again, lead to more of that shame spiral. It's like, well, I should be doing this. I know I should be doing this, but I can't. Why can't I? What's wrong with me, right? Kind of, again, going through that loop. But in terms of, we were talking about motivation and how, if someone's really not feeling that motivation, again, part of like moving through this resistance, how can we change that? Like, how can motivation come from a space where it's just not there? It's very low. And where do you start with that?
Well, what I'll tell clients is, and you touched on this, where it's like most often people want to change. Like, I know I want to change. And actually what's getting in my way are my habits.
Right.
So it's kind of like going through my 3 coffees in the morning help me stay relaxed.
Maybe not.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
Or like these, like, kind of looking at my day and seeing like, where am I staying stagnant, and like, who am I wanting to call in? Like, what's this future person look like? Do they have a little more, are they a little bit more balanced? Like, Do they read? Do they like go for walks more often? Are they like, like what does that person look like? And what habits do I have now? Can I start to chip away at, So often I'll say put an alarm. Like it's like, because motivation sometimes comes after, right? It's like when you go to the gym, it's never, or you go to yoga or whatever movement practice you have. It's kind of like you almost have to just
go through the motions,
do the thing, and then go through the motions, right?
Yeah.
Because you will actually, like, the motivation doesn't come first. Generally, it comes afterwards as we start to get into that feedback loop of a felt experience. So as we start to feel better, it creates that momentum. So I would even sometimes take motivation out of it because it's kind of a sticky word, because if I wait to be motivated, I may never go. So it's kind of just taking the first step and allowing yourself to just show up, try a new thing, and then let that experience inform your next decision. Because most likely, maybe you feel a little better. Maybe there's a little more like space in your mind, or, a new aliveness in your body, and you can just take that next step, until you start building a routine and a habit that is more supportive of your goals.
I love that. And Tony Robbins, he has some good little nuggets here and there. But I know one thing you were saying is the biggest thing. Yes, you have to change your physiological state before you do anything. If you're sitting there and you're in a demotivated state, let's say you feel sluggish, low mood, and you're trying to make a decision. You're trying to make, a decision maybe to work out. Like, you're going to keep coming to, I don't feel like it. I don't feel like it. But if you just, as Lisa, you were saying, like, just go and do the thing, the endorphins that can come from, especially, exercise and movement. And it doesn't even have to be, really high intensity, but that in itself can, lift the mood. And then it's just this positive feedback loop. And so, I love what you said there around motivation, because it's, again, I think people sit in that camp of low motivation, and, it can be kind of an excuse and a major obstacle to taking any steps. But it's, what I would say is trust in the process, that if you do take some of those steps, that things kind of will evolve from there. And then it's easier to take the next step after that. You said something about habits, and we could probably talk for hours about that, but I wanted to just talk about phones, because in terms of obstacles, and this is in my life as well, I think we all can relate to this, but just technology and our relationship to technology, I think can really eat up a lot of our time, could also eat up a lot of our mental capacity. I think it can really be harmful on our mental health, but there's this addiction there. And so I just wanted to mention that I think part of even moving through resistance, as hard as it can be, is actually creating a healthier relationship with technology and making more, I guess, restrictions on the use of that. It opens up so much space in your life. And I know it's hard, but I've seen and talked with patients so much about this. And when patients are really more structured around that, like, I only check my phone, let's say at this time of the day or a few times, chunks of the day, and aren't constantly on their phones, it's generally a very good thing for their mental health. So I don't know if you have any other points about that, Lisa, but I do find that's a big one in today's society.
Oh, yeah. And I think this is where knowledge is power, because, our phones and the technology built into them, they're built for our attention. They're brilliant in capturing our attention, and they're built that way. So, reminding ourselves that, that is the relationship we're engaging with, is one that has a lot of, hundreds of thousands of people behind those apps, like the user interfaces to draw our attention. And while I think I may be like mentally strong, there's a lot on the other side of that device that is kind of working against me on purpose, for better or worse, right? We get a lot, and we also give, our attention to it. I think that's where it's like, just even maybe dialoguing or journaling, like how you feel with less time on your phone. so that you can start to almost catalog like how you feel. Like, oh, I feel a little bit more relaxed, because I think when we start a new relationship in that way, especially with technology or any habit, if we can have a marker, it gives us something to reflect back on when we need that support, and that like, oh yeah, I used to be on it like 3 hours a day. Now it's an hour and a half. Okay, great. I'm improving. And actually here's some evidence that I'm feeling a little bit lighter, a little less weighed down. So having a system in place that allows you some reflection on all the hard work that you're doing, especially when trying to change such a strong habit, such as, using our phone maybe more than we'd like to.
Yeah, that's a good tip. It's all reflection. I mean, at the end of the day, like reflection is everything, right? Making time for reflection. Now, in terms of time, we did start a bit late today, given some technology issues. So I think what we'll do next is kind of recap. Well, not even just recap, but just talk about, what people can do right away, maybe some more simple ideas. And, we've mentioned it a little bit while we've been talking, the phone piece, and I quickly mentioned nutrition. So the piece about blood sugar balancing, again, there's probably many podcasts on here talking about that, because at Advanced Women's Health, it's a foundation. It's a big foundation that we work on with our clients. But, a quick overview with that would be, again, making sure that there's sufficient protein with your meals. And I find, in terms of even good habit formation, the morning can dictate so much of how our day goes. And, even coming back to technology, and I've been bad for this too, but waking up and going right on our phones and, looking at the news and right away, or social media right away, kind of starting that kind of, I guess, getting negative information or stressful information or just distraction. I find if you wake up and do some sort of a mindful activity, whether again, it's 5 minutes of sitting, sometimes just sitting and doing nothing, or, guided meditation or a silent meditation, listening to music, it's just something really gentle, I think often is a good start and is going to help set the tone for the rest of the day. The protein in the morning, I'm sure you grew up with your mom always saying breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And in a way, they're right, because, if you wake up and, I have patients, well, I ate breakfast, so that's better than not eating breakfast. And I'd probably argue that's not true. If we're waking up and having, let's say, a scone or a donut or a muffin, right, which essentially, as much sugar as a donut, then you could really set yourself up. And I do this with my fingers, but because you can cause a blood sugar spike. And if it's not well balanced with protein and fibers and fats, then what can happen is following that spike, you're going to get a blood sugar crash. And that's like a huge physiological stressor first thing in the morning. And it can take the body, again, as I mentioned before, the body can recover from that and then brings the blood sugar back up with that cortisol and adrenaline response. But here you're having like this major stressor happening earlier in the morning. And then the recovery from that can cause, it doesn't feel good. The body recovers, but it can definitely have more long-term impacts on your mental health. And I've seen anxiety and stress, and, people say, I just have it all the time. It's out of nowhere. And then, we start working on these pieces and they feel completely different. So, it's a more simple way to, and nutrition can be complicated in making those changes, but, using that framework of really thinking about that protein piece can be really, really helpful. And I've seen that helpful for my patients. So that's, 2 pieces. Lisa, if you want to add on to that, kind of some simple things people can do.
Yeah, one of my favorite practices that I do daily, even when I'm working, is I'll just become aware of my breath. To me, this is one of the quickest ways I can access my nervous system and get information. Sometimes I'll be treating or I'll be having a conversation, and without my awareness, my shoulders have started to creep up to my ears, and I'm breathing in my chest, and I'm noticing that my anxiety is going up a little bit. So as soon as I become aware of that, and this comes through practice of just constantly throughout the day, I'll just kind of be scanning my body. As soon as I notice that, I bring my breath down just below my belly button, and I'll just focus on the exhale. So I'll just take, 2-second breath in and 4 seconds out. And I'll do that maybe for 5 breaths. I don't need to hang out there for too long, especially if I'm at work and I'm engaging with people, but it's something I can do in the background to kind of reset my system. Because as I extend the exhale, I'm actually starting to initiate that parasympathetic response. So I'm moving the nervous system into rest and digest. And that's something I can just gently in the background quickly do to reset my system. And I'll notice that my shoulders soften. I have a little more access to presence, and my muscle tension goes down in my shoulders. Because something that people don't often know is that when we're breathing in our chest, a lot of our front body is actually activating. So that will lead to headaches, muscle tension. And so we're getting this sort of physiological response from our body. So we can actually do the reverse. We can start to access our breath to help navigate and self-regulate. There's a lot more we could go into with the breath there, but I would say just becoming aware of it and extending the exhale, hitting that brake pedal a little bit, just gives us a little space in our day. Just a little bit of space.
I love, and it's so accessible, it's free. Again, it's different. So sometimes it can be hard to incorporate these things. It's just different, but I urge you to try. And again, sometimes you got to go through those motions and you may not notice anything right away, but over time, it may be one of those habits, and often is one of those habits that you wake up looking forward to starting your day that way. Right. And that's when it's easier, a habit, because it's comfortable. So I think the last piece is just wanted to mention that Lisa and I are planning on doing a course, and it goes deeper into all these pieces, because I think, we've just touched many components, and a lot of this can, some of these pieces you can do on your own, but sometimes it can be helpful to have a bit more guidance and know exactly maybe for you where the best place to start, because everyone's at a different place in their journey and everyone has different obstacles. And so having a conversation can be really valuable. So yeah, we're really looking forward to hosting a course. So would love for anyone interested to come and join us. But yeah, it's been so lovely chatting with you, Lisa, as always.
Well, I just thank everyone for listening and taking the time to learn a little more. Honestly, it really has changed my life and integrating all these pieces. And I look forward to sharing them.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been fun. All right. Take care for now. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you had as much fun as we did. And if you loved today's episode, share it with a friend and leave us a review. That is how we spread this message, and that is how we are going to revolutionize healthcare in Canada for women. Have a beautiful day and be well.